Still wet for her.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Susie Emmert-Schatz, and I represent the This is Medicaid Coalition. We're a diverse group of organizations representing tens of thousands of Minnesotans who need Medicaid. We came together in response to proposals that would forever change the 52-year promise of Medicaid as we know it. Medicaid, or in Minnesota Medical Assistance, was established in 1965, long before the Affordable Care Act. It's a one-to-one state and federal partnership designed to be flexible and responsive to a state's needs. Medicaid is there for children, families, people with disabilities, people experiencing mental illnesses, adults in poverty, and seniors. More than 1 million Minnesotans rely on Medicaid because they qualify with a low income or a disability. Medicaid means people can get preventative checkups, services in schools, emergency care, life-saving medications and treatments, nursing home care, and in-home services that keep people with disabilities and seniors living independently at home for longer. The Medicaid expansion covers 200,000 Minnesotans with an income of up to $16,600 a year, or roughly $9 an hour working full-time. In Minnesota, 73% of these folks are working, and we know that at least 50,000 of them are now receiving mental health care or chemical dependency care that they couldn't have received before. Others are receiving treatment for chronic conditions like diabetes and asthma. Behind me stand your fellow Minnesotans, each one connected to Medicaid in some way. Moms of children with disabilities, cancer survivors, caregivers, workers, people with disabilities living in the community. Medicaid is there for people when they need it, and one thing is for sure, that no one standing with us up here today, or no one on Medicaid today, ever plans or expected to need it. The Graham-Cassidy bill is yet another attempt to fundamentally restructure Medicaid in a way that will harm each of the people standing here with me today, and all of us. It would eliminate and cap dollars to states. It would eliminate the Medicaid expansion and absolutely alter the flexible state and federal partnership that has existed for the last half century. It would leave Minnesota on the hook and our hands tied in response to recessions, natural disasters, public health emergencies, and even the age wave. Medicaid is far more than a healthcare program. It speaks to our values as Minnesotans to ensure protection for those who need it, strong families and communities, and our own health and well-being. Minnesota prides itself on being a leader in healthcare nationally. The Graham-Cassidy bill undermines the progress that we have made. Governor Dayton's first act in office was to sign in the Medicaid expansion into law, giving thousands of Minnesotans access to this life-saving care. And we are here to protect that care. I am very honored to introduce today Governor Mark Dayton and Lieutenant Governor Tina Smith. Thank you.
I'm going to be brief because I want you to be able to hear from people who are really directly affected by this terrible, terrible undertaking of the Trump administration and the Republican majorities in the U.S. House and Senate to devastate health care for millions of Minnesotans and other Americans, and starting first and foremost, as was just said so well, with Medicaid. I was, on my second full day in office, privileged to sign the Medicaid expansion. It's done wonders for saving lives, transforming lives, improving lives of many thousands of people across Minnesota. And now the Trump administration and the Republicans in Congress are taking aim at the cost of providing quality health care for all of our citizens. And it's just, and leading up to a tax cut in the follow that will benefit inordinately the rich and large corporations. So this is absolutely abandonment of people who need the government support for people who don't. You know, just briefly, 1 out of every 3 Minnesota children is covered by Medicaid. 42% of Medicaid recipients in Minnesota are children. 60% of all Medicaid funding is for seniors and people with disabilities. Medicaid pays for 54% of all nursing home costs in Minnesota. The sham that the Congress is trying to perpetrate on states and on the people they represent is to say we're going to give you block grants starting in 2020. We're going to give you a limited amount of money, not sufficient to meet the growing needs, and then you get to decide where to make the terrible cuts. You get to decide, you states decide who doesn't get served, who's going to be eliminated from Medicaid assistance. It's a travesty, it's a tragedy. I thank our two U.S. senators, Senator Klobuchar and Senator Franken, for their steadfast opposition to this and other attempts to destroy the health care protections that Minnesotans need and depend upon. Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. There are so many things wrong with this latest attempt to roll back Obamacare, and there are so many great reasons to vote against it, which is what we hope happens later this week. I mean, first of all, there's been no reasonable public discussion or vetting or nonpartisan analysis of the impacts and the consequences of this bill. Second, it dramatically weakens consumer protections. So, for example, allowing states to protections for pre-existing conditions or excluding important treatments like substance abuse treatment. But ultimately, it is just so terrible that it undermines Medicaid, which provides health insurance to more than 1 million Minnesotans, our neighbors, our children, our grandparents, our friends. And I want to be clear, this so-called reform, which is no reform at all, does not reduce health care costs. What it does is it shifts costs to families and to Minnesota taxpayers, and it shifts money to the people that are going to benefit from the tax cuts that Governor Dayton was just talking about. It is bad for Minnesota, it is bad for our families, and it is bad for our health. And now you have an opportunity to hear from people who will be directly affected by this terrible bill.
Hello. I never expected to have a child with a lifelong disability. No one does. And yet I have a beautiful, amazing 6-year-old at home that will probably never speak to me. He'll never live on his own. He'll never grow up cognitively, and he'll need lifelong care. And it's taken me 7 years to be able to say this to you. My son has nonverbal severe autism, and I need to care for him for the rest of his life. And once again, on my short journey, I find myself standing before you, pleading, educating, begging, and demanding for our most vulnerable population. I'm a working mom with private health insurance who pays monthly for Medicaid, which means out of every paycheck, I pay my private health insurance premium, and then I pay for my son Cooper to have Medicaid. I do this because my health insurance only pays for a tiny part of this little boy's care, and he needs so much more, and these are services that only Medicaid offers. Before you have a kid, or if you never have a kid with a disability, you wouldn't know that Medicaid is not just for seniors and that your health insurance doesn't pay for everything. Medicaid pays for diapers, transportation, therapy, education, respite. Medicaid means that my son can live with me in our home, and it means that I can still work. I did everything right, and I want you to know that because I question it. I did everything right. I want you to know that because I question it all the time. I went to college, I got a job, I graduated, I got married, bought a house, and then I had a baby, and I did everything right during that pregnancy, and he is disabled, and it can happen to anyone. I want you to know that. You can wake up tomorrow and need Medicaid. And now, instead of saving for my son's college education, I'm planning for the care for his rest of his life. And I said his life, not mine, because he's going to live far longer than me. I want to end talking about the future, and that's not something families with disabilities normally talk about. Medicaid gives our family hope for the future and a plan. Cooper can attend these therapies that he's in right now till he's 23. Then he can go into a program where he can learn to work or volunteer. He can be with his peers in the community. He won't be stuck in our home. And if there ever comes a day where Cooper can't live with me, Medicaid will help us. And equally important, I can continue to work and prepare for retirement. To those elected officials that are making decisions for Cooper, for little boys just like this, and for families, please vote no.
Hello, my name is Christy Purcell, and my family of four has in the past and even today have benefited from Medicaid in Minnesota. My partner Michael and I were able to return to our beloved home state in 2009 because he enrolled as a graduate student at the U of M. During those 2 years, we had access to wonderful health insurance. After Michael completed grad school, I became the one responsible for carrying our health insurance, and he began to work on organic farms. This interest led us just over 2 years ago to move our family south to Rice County in order to pursue our dream to start our own small farm. It was a big decision for us to commit to farming, and the healthcare question has always been a major consideration for us and the other farmers and their families in my rural community. In order for us to make the move to Northfield, I accepted a job at a small nonprofit that does not provide health care to our 5 employees. And Michael, as a self-employed small business owner, of course, doesn't have access to a group health care plan. Our family's experiences with Minnesota Care and medical assistance have not been perfect, but the ability to even access health care has been life-changing. Just last year, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, and I don't want to fear bringing my children in to see a doctor when they catch strep or they need a flu shot. Our ability to seek affordable medical support in these first few years of our new business has made all the difference, both for the health and security of our family and our livelihood. This season, we hired our first employee, and we'd like to continue helping our local economy create more jobs and a better quality of life where we live. It's important to us to continue trying to make Minnesota a great place to live, work, and raise a family. That goal has been made more possible for us with assistance both from Minnesota Care and medical assistance.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Gorlick. I'm the President and Chief Operating Officer of Children's Minnesota and a pediatrician. We see about 125,000 kids a year at Children's, and like most major children's hospitals, about half those kids are covered by Medicaid. In fact, nationally, Medicaid is the largest insurer of kids. Almost half of Medicaid enrollees are children, so you can't really talk about Medicaid unless you talk about the impact on children. So let's think about where we are now. 95% of kids in this country have health insurance. That's an all-time high. Because of requirements for essential health benefits, those kids not only have access to medical care when they're sick, but comprehensive care, including preventive care, mental and behavioral health, vision, dental care. Third, pregnant moms have better access to prenatal care, and that provides better outcomes for their babies. And then finally, because of the requirements around or limitations on lifetime and annual caps and preventions against discrimination based on pre-existing conditions, a family facing a premature infant or baby born with a serious medical condition, they don't have to worry about how they're going to pay for that. And the Graham-Cassidy bill puts all of that at risk. So the per capita caps, according to a recent study, would lead to $40 billion decrease in spending on children's health care alone. And it waives many of those requirements that I mentioned that are essential to making sure that kids have comprehensive health care. In my 30 years in pediatrics, I don't think I've seen a threat to children's health care quite like this one. So I want to thank our senators, Franken and Klobuchar, for taking a stand against this bill. I would hope that if this makes it to the House, that our delegation would also be opposed to it as being inimical to the health of Minnesota's children. We are dedicated at Children's to improving the health of all children, and we are ready to work with anybody who wants to come up with a bipartisan, or even better, a nonpartisan solution that would actually provide the kind of comprehensive care for kids that would allow them to lead healthier lives.
My name is Patrick Ness with the Wilder Foundation and a member of the This Is Medicaid Coalition. What we heard today is what's on the line for Minnesotans. What's on the line socially, economically, morally for the state of Minnesota. Medicaid is a promise that's been in place for 52 years. It's a promise about how we take care of each other in this state. For children, for people with disabilities, for older adults, for very low-income single adults, Medicaid is there when we need it. I have people very close in my life who are currently on Medicaid who are staying up at night because they don't know what's going to happen with this bill. We have a sign-on letter that you have in front of you. There were 158 organizations within Minnesota who are standing in unison against the Graham-Cassidy legislation. 158 organizations spanning all corners of the state, representing all communities. I have not been involved in an issue that had such opposition and really very little support. In the coming week, in fact, in the coming minutes, the United States Senate will have their one and only committee hearing. They changed the bill today. We don't know what's in it. And so we'll do our best to answer your questions now, but this is changing. Healthcare is nearly 1/5 of the United States economy, and we don't even know what's in the bill right now. The process alone, outside of the content of the bill, should be enough to put this on hold and come up with a bipartisan solution. We call on the Minnesota congressional delegation to vote no on the Graham-Cassidy bill. Thank you. We can take any questions.
I think the questions on this subject, and then you're all invited to go into my office there, and we'll cry, but you're all welcome, and then we'll, then they're gonna fire away at me. Although it'd probably be better if you sit around, because then they're nicer. Not much, but a little. So questions, especially of the people who are gathered here.
What's the best estimate of how long the state can continue if this bill passes without extra money?
Well, as I said, the bill is constantly moving. The last I read is it would take effect in 2020, and all the federal money would be replaced by a block grant, which would not be sufficient to meet all of the current commitments. So at that point, right away, state legislature and whoever's governor and the like will have to make very impossible decisions of who not to serve, how to cut back and stay within that, or come up with state money, additional state money. And who knows what our financial situation is going to be then. So, you know, it puts everybody at risk. It puts everybody at serious jeopardy. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
One of the participants talked about what this uncertainty is doing to your lives.
And could you give us your name, please?
Yeah, my name is Kate Swenson, and I'm talking about my son Cooper. He's 6.
Where do you live?
I live in Cottage Grove, Minnesota. So my son attends an autism-specific program that my health insurance will not pay for. They choose not to cover it, so Medicaid pays completely for his care right now. If that goes away, oh God, I don't even know what we'll do, because in the short time he's been there, public education couldn't care for him. And I mean, they've taught him skills such as using the toilet, drinking from a cup, sitting in a chair. If we lose that, my son will regress dramatically, and there are no other options unless I want to throw on the table my husband and I quitting our job and bringing our income to zero, so then we can be on Medicaid in a different way.
And is this keeping you up at night right now, even if you have?
It is keeping us up at night. Yes, I'm surprised I don't have an ulcer, to be honest. And I wish it would just stop happening. It just keeps coming. We think we beat something, and then it happens again. I don't know if it's going to be like this for the rest of his life. Are we going to have to keep fighting like this?
Do you have other children?
I do. We have a 4-year-old, and our whole life is surrounded by around our disabled child, and the rest of us are just along for the ride. And that's a fact.
Anything else while we've got the group together?
Yes. Have any of you briefed Senator Klobuchar in your situation before her debate tonight on CNN?
We reached out to the senator's office and offered our resources, and so we've been in contact with her staff, and look forward to tonight.
Did you give them stories that you've used?
The This is Medicaid Coalition has been consistently sharing stories with our congressional delegation over the last 6 months, and so she does have those stories.
Anything else for the group?
Yeah. Would anybody up front, the folks, most of whom I know, I'm from the statewide paper for people with disabilities, would any of you, Daryl, Nikki, any of you like to share your stories?
Good question.
Yeah, hi, I'm Nikki Villavicencio. I use Medicaid every day to live every day. I come to this Capitol many times a year to talk about disability services. My husband, my partner I should say, is also disabled. He uses Medicaid every day for home care services. I use it for eye care. I have a 5-year-old daughter who's in public school now, and I wouldn't be able to care for her if I didn't have Medicaid services. So I too think about this issue every single day, and it pains me to know that the people that are worse off than me will not be able to live anymore.
Can you say your name again, please?
Nikki Villavicencio, Villavicencio.
Anybody else in the front here would care to share anything? Thanks for sharing.
Good on this topic?
We'll go on to other subjects. Please go on in the room and have a chance to visit.
Governor, I just wanted to say thank you, and I don't do remember, but on your very second day in office, you were the one, you handed me your very first pen when you enacted this. So, thank you. You remember that?
I don't remember the
It
pen.
was about 5.
I remember all people here supporting it.
It was about 5:30, 6 o'clock at night. We just went in, and you were like, here, well, let me hear your story. And a couple of days later, you came and you did this bill signing. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ron, please join us in the office there, if you care to.
All right.
All right, questions on other subjects?
The 1332 waiver, how is that going to affect funding for Minnesota Care? What do you know about that right now? Last week?
We know that it's uncertain. We're getting revised estimates on a regular basis now, with a belief is $338 million of federal money for reinsurance. That we would gain $369 million of funds for the basic health plan, which is Minnesota Care, that we would lose. So that margin has been reduced, fortunately, but it's still a negative number. We believe that the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Administrator for CMS have the authority and the discretion to provide both funding, as their staffs strongly indicated last spring. And we're putting together a briefing, which we'll make public, of course, when we send it out to them, explaining the background and why we believe that we should be receiving that basic health plan money in addition to the reinsurance money.
Is there any scenario where you say, forget your reinsurance program and your waiver, we're going to keep our 540 or whatever it is?
We're double checking the statute, but my reading of the state law is that they've approved the reinsurance waiver, and that triggers puts into place the reinsurance. So I think, in my reading at this point, we're having council double check it. It's very clear cut. They've approved, and therefore the reinsurance program takes effect.
Why do you think there's uncertainty? The letter was pretty clear on the basic health plan.
Well, because we have 30 days to try to persuade them to change their mind.
Other questions?
At the Lynx game yesterday, I think you were there, Lieutenant Governor, there was a reaction to the national anthem. Do you, either of you have reactions to the current controversy?
I was at the Lynx game yesterday, and there was such a strong sense of people all coming together at that game, though not quite 1 point off. But my personal experience was that there was action was taken for the players and the coaches to show to exercise their rights and their responsibilities to their beliefs and their values, and I thought it fit beautifully with the overall day.
What's your feeling on the situation?
Well, I personally disagree with those who sit or kneel during the national anthem. I think especially sports figures who are making many millions of dollars should be out there day after day providing assistance, as some of them are, to counteract the deficiencies that they are speaking out against. But I don't question their constitutional right to do so. And I think, unfortunately, the president, beyond expressing his disapproval of that action, has made this into a much greater conflict than it should be. And it, again, misses the point of what I believe is the respect that we all owe the flag. That's why I voted against the constitutional amendment to ban the burning of the American flag back when I was in the U.S. Senate. People can disagree with their government, and I do, and I have. They can disagree with those of us who are in government, but that flag to me is sacrosanct. It's something that every Minnesotan and every American who lost her or his life shed their blood for, and I personally believe that it should be respected. And as I say, beyond that, people should find other means to express their displeasures.
Any other questions?
Just to clarify one thing back to the reinsurance, when you talked about the 30 days, can you elaborate on what that clock is, what has to be determined in that time, and what happens after that period?
Well, the letter that we received from Health and Human Services says that we have 30 days to confirm our acceptance of all of the conditions that they put in. And again, they're more than just this one, so we're reviewing that to see. But they did state firmly in the letter that our application has been approved. And according to my reading of Minnesota law, that puts into effect the reinsurance program. If we have other parts of it, we'll enlist our congressional delegation to try to change what that letter outlines, and we'll communicate that certainly before the 30 days and just in the next couple of days, and see what kind of movement we can achieve.
But if you don't accept one of the conditions, does that mean that HHS pulls back their approval?
Well, let's cross that bridge when we come to it. I don't know. I again, look at the language in Minnesota statute. It says it's contingent on the approval. We didn't anticipate at that time, and didn't know until a week ago that the funding for the basic health plan was going to be linked to the reinsurance. So there's nobody's fault here in Minnesota. We are proceeding on good faith based on the specific instructions we received from CMS staff, and I realize they are staff, not the secretary or the administrator, but even so, we followed explicitly their instructions so that we would separate reinsurance from the basic health plan. And much to our shock and dismay beginning of last week, we were told otherwise. So we're still sorting through this, and I don't have any more definitive response now. I'll certainly share it with you as this unfolds, but it's I think it's clear what the administration and the Republican Congress wants to do to public health care and to those who depend upon it, whether it's been through Medicaid or Minnesota Care or the Affordable Care Act, or whatever is deficiencies. It provides the kind of protection and assurance that people have who never had it before, that they have access to quality health care, they're going to have assistance paying for it. And they're talking about dismantling all of that, following up with a tax cut. It's going to be inordinately stacked in favor of the wealthy and large corporations, and the very assurances that were made to so many people who voted last November because they believed in these assurances that working people were going to be given priority number one are finding out that that's totally false.
To be clear, do you think that, is your read that state law wouldn't allow Minnesota to reject the waiver? The state law says apply for the waiver if it's approved, then you must proceed ahead with it?
Where's Kim? Where's the language I asked for? What is the, can you give me the reading, give me the actual statute? Where is it in the statute? So it says this section, meaning reinsurance, is effective upon federal approval of the state innovation request in Article 1, Section 8. The Commissioner of Commerce shall inform the revisor of statutes when federal approval is obtained. Again, my personal interpretation, and I'm not a lawyer, and we're going to review this, we'll review it with the Attorney General's office as well as my general counsel, is that they have approved it. That's all I can say at this point.
Barring some kind of reversal from the federal government on BHP funding, are you going to have to put together some kind of, some language, some bill to make Minnesota Care funding whole?
Well, we're assessing, I believe I said last week in the outset of all of this, that we believe we do have enough money in the reserve to fund Minnesota Care through calendar 2018. We'll have another legislative session before that to deal with the current state of affairs, we'll deal with whatever the federal government does or doesn't do in terms of a broader repeal and change. So, there's so many unanswered questions right now, and we will have enough money. I do want to assure people who are on Minnesota Care that we have enough money to operate the program through calendar 2018, and we'll look at what needs to be done to continue it at that point in time.
Okay. Governor, back to the anthem protesters. You're talking about the people, the players that have knelt during the anthem. What did you make of what we saw with the Vikings and NFL teams?
Well, they stood. Those who stood, linked arms. No, I just think that's very appropriate, especially in the context of what has, been going on. And again, I have my personal opinion, and the various players who've taken positions have theirs, and they have a right to their position. I have a right to mine, and that shouldn't be called into question. To sanction people, talk about firing them or whatever is, again, I think it takes it way beyond what's maybe illegal, but also what's appropriate. So I have an honest disagreement with people, especially people who are in very well-paid and favored situations in our society, using something that gets a lot of public attention. But I would ask each one of them, and some of them have, what do they do day after day to make a difference beyond playing professional sports? Okay.
It's been a couple days since Friday's mediation. I'm just wondering if you've had some time to reflect on what new insights you may have between now and...
I don't have a chance to talk with our attorney later this afternoon about what the next legal steps are. I believe there's a report due to the Supreme Court by September 30th. And we need to discuss what that strategy would be. I just say again how deeply distressed I was and am by the serious misrepresentation by the Republican leaders in the legislature of what their true financial condition was until they can return to a regular session next February and restore the funding that I vetoed. The whole premise for this legal action, which is going to cost the people of Minnesota probably close to $1 million, was because I was trying to abolish them. The very language they've used even last week. I was trying to abolish the legislature. And by withholding the money they need to operate, their whole premise is false. They have enough money to operate. They know they have enough money to operate. They knew at whatever point, certainly last week when they filed a brief stating otherwise to the Minnesota Supreme Court, they knew otherwise. And I hope that the public, people of Minnesota will hold them to account for that deception.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.